The first thing Aisha Minsa noticed about the mansion was the silence. Not the comfortable kind of silence that settles into a well-loved home at the end of a long day. This was the silence of a place that had never been properly lived in. The kind of silence that collects in corners like dust, that stretches across marble floors without apology, that sits in expensive rooms and makes them feel somehow emptier than a bare room would. It was the silence of a man who came home every night and didn't know what to do with the space around him. Aisha noticed all of this in approximately 11 seconds. Then she put her earphones in, turned her playlist on, and got to work. She had arrived at 276 Hanamdaro at 7:43 in the morning with her caddy in one hand, her phone in the other, and the absolute certainty of a woman who has never once second-guessed a decision she's already made. The gate had been open. The address matched. The place needed cleaning badly enough that she could tell from the driveway. She walked in. The fact that this was not her scheduled client's address was a detail that would become relevant later. For now, she had a job to do. The kitchen was first, because the kitchen always told you everything you needed to know about a person. She opened the first cabinet and stared for a long moment at the contents. Boxes of expensive tea organized by no discernible system. A single pot that had clearly never touched a flame. Spices in the freezer. She opened the freezer specifically to confirm this, found cumin and paprika sitting beside an ice tray, and closed it again slowly. "Okay," she said to no one. "Okay." She moved through the kitchen like a woman on a mission, which she was, narrating quietly to herself the way she always did when she was working through something. The narration kept her father's voice out. That was the arrangement she had made with herself years ago. Keep moving, keep talking, keep the music loud, and the voice stayed manageable. The moment she went still and quiet, it found her. She did not like to go still and quiet. The living room was next. She stood in the doorway for a full 30 seconds taking inventory. Whoever lived here had taste. The furniture was exquisite, the art on the walls chosen with genuine eye, but it was all assembled without warmth. Like a hotel lobby. Like someone had read a description of what a home should look like and reproduced it without understanding why. She found documents organized by no system she could identify spread across an expensive table. She reorganized them by color and font size because at least that was a system. She found what she would later describe to her mother as enthusiastic tomato sauce. In 2 locations, she chose not to investigate further. She cleaned them efficiently and moved on. The upper hallway gave her the reading chair. She almost walked past it. It was tucked into an alcove beside a window that caught the morning light at an angle that made the whole space look like something from a painting. The chair was worn in a way that everything else in this house wasn't. Genuinely used, genuinely loved. The armrests softened by years of habitual use. There was a book face down on the seat and a bookmark that had slipped slightly sideways. Aisha stopped. She looked at the chair the way she looked at the things in a house that told the truth about their owner. Then she reached out and straightened the bookmark carefully, the way you straighten something that matters, and moved on down the hallway without letting herself think too hard about why it made her chest feel strange. She cleaned for 6 hours. Every room, every surface. She reorganized, decluttered, scrubbed, and polished until the mansion smelled like lavender and possibility. She moved through the space with the particular satisfaction of someone who is genuinely good at the thing they do for a living, whatever complicated feelings surround the fact of doing it. At the end, she stood in the kitchen, tore a piece of paper from the notepad she kept in her caddy, and wrote, "You really should vacuum under the couch more, sweetheart. Also, your spices belong in the cabinet, not the freezer. I moved them. You're welcome. Your maid." She folded an origami crane from the first piece of paper she found on the counter, a habit her mother had taught her, something to do with her hands when she finished a job, a small signature she left without thinking too much about. She placed the crane beside the note, picked up her caddy, and walked back out into the afternoon sun without a single backward glance. She did not look at what the paper said. It was a ransom note. Kang Jun-ho came home at 6:17 in the evening to find his mansion smelling like lavender. He stood in the entrance hall and went very still. His second-in-command, Shin Jae-won, stepped in behind him and immediately reached for the weapon at his hip. Kang raised one hand without looking at him. A single, small gesture. Shin's hand dropped. Kang moved through his home slowly. His face, which his subordinates had compared privately to a wall, to a locked door, to a no-entry sign, revealed nothing. This was the face he had spent 20 years constructing. It had never once been breached by surprise, by fear, by grief, by any of the things that moved across ordinary men's faces like weather. It did not breach now, but something was happening behind his eyes. The living room, ordered. The documents he had left scattered across the table, reorganized by color and font size, which made absolutely no tactical sense and was somehow the most organized they had ever been. The kitchen. He opened the cabinet and found his spices returned from the freezer to their correct location. There was a note on the counter. He read it twice. He found the origami crane sitting beside the note, made from a ransom note that had been awaiting his attention, now folded into something small and delicate and exact. He picked it up carefully, turned it in his hands. He walked up the hallway and found the reading chair. The bookmark was straightened. He sat down in the chair that none of his staff came near, the chair that existed in a part of the house he had quietly made clear was not for other people. And he sat there while the evening light shifted and the room went slowly dark around him. Shin appeared in the doorway at some point. Kang was not certain how much time had passed. "Sir," Shin said carefully, "find out who came in here today." Shin's hand moved toward his weapon again. "Should I consider them a threat?" The pause that followed was long enough to be its own kind of answer. "Find out if they do weekly visits." Shin stared at the back of his employer's head. Kang opened his book. The conversation was over. Aisha's apartment was on the 4th floor of a building in Mapo-gu that had good bones and a landlord who responded to maintenance requests within the same calendar year if you were persistent. It was small. It was immaculate. She had painted the kitchen wall herself in the 2nd month of living there, a warm terracotta that her mother said looked like home, and she had arranged everything in it with the particular care of someone who has learned not to rely on spaces staying stable, and so makes the spaces she controls as stable as possible. She came home, showered, made rice and stew from a recipe her mother had been teaching her by phone installment for 3 years, and called her mother while she ate. Her mother's voice was the first genuinely soft thing in Aisha's day. It always was. "How was work?" her mother asked. "Productive," Aisha said, which was true. "I cleaned a mansion today. Wrong address, turned out. But the gate was open and the place needed help." Her mother laughed. "Aisha, the client got a refund. The mansion got cleaned. Everybody wins." They talked about ordinary things for a while. The weather in Accra. Her mother's neighbor's ongoing dispute with a mango tree. The small, sustaining details of a life being lived on the other side of the world that Aisha collected carefully and kept. Then her mother said, "Your father asked about you today." The warmth in Aisha's chest did something complicated. Not disappeared. Her mother's voice kept some of it alive, but rearranged itself around a cold center that had been there for 8 years and did not show any signs of leaving. "What did you tell him?" she said. "That you're doing well." "Good. Because I am." Her mother paused. In that pause lived everything they did not say to each other about her father. An entire conversation they had been not having for 8 years, fluent and detailed and never spoken aloud. "Nana drew a picture of you today," her mother said, in the tone of someone offering something carefully. "She drew you with a mop and a crown." The laugh that came out of Aisha was real and helpless and lived right beside a sound that wasn't a laugh at all. "That's my girl," she managed. "She asks about you every day." "I know." Quietly. "She wants to know when you're coming to visit." "Soon. Tell her soon." She hung up and sat in the clean silence of her apartment and let herself think about Nana for exactly as long as she could bear, which was never as long as her daughter deserved. 7 years old. Living with her grandmother in Accra because her mother was in Seoul telling herself she was building something better, saving something better, becoming something better, and trying not to examine too closely whether any of that was true or whether she was just running. Then her father's voice arrived, as it always did when she went still. "I always knew you wouldn't be able to hold yourself together." She stood up, turned her music on, turned it up loud. She was not still anymore. 3 days later, a man appeared at her door who was so formally dressed and so specifically large that Aisha's first thought was that she had won a prize delivered by security personnel, and her second thought was that she had definitely cleaned the wrong house. "Ms. Aisha Mensah," the man said. He had the voice of someone who had professionally removed all inflection from it. "Depends on who's asking. My employer requests the honor of a weekly cleaning arrangement." He produced a card with a rate written on it, and held it out with the ceremony of a man presenting a state document. Aisha took the card. Read the number. Went very still in a way that had nothing to do with her father's voice and everything to do with what that number could mean for Nana's school fees, for the apartment she wanted to give her daughter, for the specific future she had been building toward in increments that sometimes felt too small to matter. "Who is your employer?" she said. "Mr. Kang requests discretion regarding that information at this stage. So I'm cleaning for a man whose name I can't know." "Correct." She looked at the number again. She looked at Shin, whose name she did not yet know, who was standing in her doorway with the patient stillness of a man who had delivered more unsettling propositions than this and waited for the answer. "I choose my own products," she said. Something moved across Shin's face so briefly she almost missed it. It might have been surprise. It might have been respect. He recovered immediately. "Agreed." She took the card. "Before we go any further, because trust me, what happens next will require your full attention and both hands on your heart. Do something for me right now. Follow this channel. Like this video. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss a single second of what comes next. Because this story has a mob boss who straightens his own bookmark when he thinks no one is watching, a woman who cleaned a crime scene and left a smiley face note, one very unfortunate ex-boyfriend, a 7-year-old with opinions, and an ending that will make you believe in choosing people who stay. You came for the drama. You're going to leave having felt something real. Don't miss it. Subscribe now, and let's continue. She arrived at the mansion the following Monday at 7:30 sharp, because Aisha Minsa was many things and late was not among them. She had her caddy, her products, her earphones, and the professional composure of a woman who had decided this was simply a job and would remain simply a job regardless of the raid on the card or the way the gate opened before she reached it, which meant someone had been watching for her arrival, which she did not examine too closely. What she had not accounted for was him still being there. He was in the kitchen when she walked in, standing at the counter with a coffee cup, reading something on his phone, dressed like someone had assembled him from a catalog of powerful men. He looked up when she entered. She stopped in the doorway. They looked at each other for a moment that was slightly too long to be neutral. "I was told you'd have left by now," she said. "I was told you'd arrive at 8. I'm early. I see that." The silence between them was charged in a way that Aisha immediately decided to be annoyed by. She walked past him to the cabinet under the sink where she had left her supplies the previous week and began organizing her caddy with the focused energy of someone who has decided to be very busy. "Your kitchen organization system," she said, without looking at him, "is an offense against reason." He looked at the cabinet she was referring to. "It's organized. By what principle? Proximity. To what?" A pause. "To wherever I was standing when I put things away." She turned to look at him. He had the expression of a man who had just heard himself say something out loud and was reconsidering it in real time. She held his gaze for a 3 count. "That," she said, "is the second saddest thing I've heard this week." "What was the first?" "That this kitchen has never been cooked in." He said nothing. She turned back to her caddy. But she had seen the thing that moved across his face in the quarter second before he recovered his expression. Something between acknowledgement and something older and harder to name. She noticed the reading chair through the open doorway at the end of the hall. She said nothing about it, but she noticed. She came on Mondays and Thursdays. He was gone by the time she arrived. Usually, the mansion empty in that particular way of a place whose occupant has just left, coffee cup rinsed and upturned by the sink, the particular displacement of air that speaks of recent presence. On those days she worked through the rooms with her music in and her thoughts managed, and she left things better than she found them, and she went home. But sometimes he was there. Not every week. Not predictably. Just sometimes the gate would open as she arrived, and she would walk into the kitchen, and he would be at the counter with his coffee and his phone, and that particular quality of stillness that she had started to think of as his natural state. The stillness of a man who has trained himself to take up exactly as much space as he chooses and no more. On those days they orbited each other with the careful precision of two people who have noticed something and made a mutual, unspoken agreement not to name it. The first week, she left a sticky note on a kitchen cabinet that read, "Spices go here. Not in the freezer. Thank you for your cooperation." She found it on the counter the following Thursday with a single question mark written beneath her message in handwriting that was unexpectedly neat for a man who ran a criminal empire. She wrote, "Yes, a question mark is not compliance. sir on a new note, and left it in the same place. When she arrived the following Monday, the spices were in the cabinet. She stood there for a moment looking at them. Then she took out a new note and wrote, "Good." She left it on the counter and moved on, and if she was smiling when she did it, she would not have admitted it to anyone. The second week, she caught him reading. Not performing reading. Actually reading. In the study, feet on the desk in a way that his carefully maintained public persona would never permit. Jacket slung over the back of the chair, entirely elsewhere. She had come to the study doorway to ask a question about a stain on the curtains and stood there for a moment watching him be human without knowing he was being watched. He looked up, caught her watching. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "The curtains," she said. "What about them?" "There's a stain on the left panel. I need to know if I can use solvent on the fabric." He looked at the curtains, then at her. "Do what you need to do." She nodded and left, and did not examine why her heart was doing something slightly accelerated in her chest. She had seen many men reading. There was nothing remarkable about it. She went home and told her mother she was fine, which was true, and that the new client was completely unremarkable, which was not. The third week, he left a kettle on the counter. Not a word about it. Not a note. Just a kettle, and beside it 2 cups, and the particular kind of arrangement that cannot be interpreted as anything other than deliberate. Aisha stood in the kitchen and looked at the 2 cups for a long moment. Then she filled the kettle, turned it on, and made herself tea, and left the second cup exactly where it was because she was not ready to pour tea for a man she didn't know, and she was certainly not going to examine why the offer of it made her want to. When she arrived on Thursday, there were 2 different kinds of tea on the counter beside the kettle. She stood there for a long time looking at that. Then she made herself the one she preferred and said nothing, and the following Monday there was a third option, and she understood that this was a man who paid attention in the way that certain people do, quietly, completely, without making a performance of it. And she understood also that this was the kind of thing she could not afford to find endearing, and she was finding it extremely endearing, and this was a problem. "What are you reading?" She had not meant to ask. She was finished for the day. Her caddy was packed. She had walked past the study doorway where he was sitting in the non-performance reading position, feet up, jacket off, completely elsewhere, and the question had simply left her mouth before she could catch it. He looked up. Something moved across his face. Surprise, she thought, or something adjacent to it. The particular expression of a man being asked about something he keeps private who hasn't decided yet whether to protect it. He held up the book. Korean poetry. She looked at the cover. Looked at him. "You run," she started, and caught herself. He raised an eyebrow. "You manage," she amended, because she was not naive about the address she had cleaned that first morning and what those organized by font-sized documents had eventually suggested to her careful noticing. A very serious operation. "And you read poetry on Thursday afternoons." "I've been reading poetry on Thursday afternoons since I was 19, he said. The operation came later. She leaned against the doorframe. She hadn't decided to do that either. Her body was making decisions without her consent today. "What's it about?" "This one." He looked at the open page. Something softened in his face in the way of a person returning to something they love. A man who spends his whole life near the sea but is afraid to go into the water. He just stands at the edge and watches it. That's sad. He thinks it's safe. It's still sad. He looked at her. "You clean crime scenes and hum completely off-key," he said. "We all have contradictions." The laugh that came out of her was completely unexpected, surprised out of her, real and unguarded. And for one fraction of a second before she recovered, she was simply a woman laughing in a doorway at something a man said, and it felt like something she had forgotten how to do. He looked at her the way you look at something you want to put somewhere safe and keep. She straightened up, adjusted the strap of her caddy. "I'm done for today," she said. "I know." Neither of them moved for a moment. "Thursday," she said. "Thursday," he agreed. She left. He went back to his book. He read the same page for more times and retained none of it. His name, she had learned, was Kang Jun-ho. She had learned this not from anyone who worked in the mansion, who were uniformly discreet in the way of people who understood that discretion was a professional survival skill, but from the general atmosphere of the place, from the way people spoke in rooms she was cleaning when they forgot she was there, from the particular quality of silence that preceded his arrival. She had also, eventually, looked him up because she was many things and stupid was not among them. She sat with what she found for a long evening. Then she went to work on Monday anyway, because the rate on the card was what it was, and because she was 26 years old, and she had survived worse situations than cleaning the home of a powerful man who read poetry and straightened his own books and left her tea options. She had told herself this was simply a job. She was becoming aware that this statement had passed its expiration date somewhere around the second week in the kettle, and she was just refusing to acknowledge the expired smell. It was on a Thursday in the fourth week that she noticed Park. She had been aware of him before. Kang's first lieutenant, present often in the operational parts of the mansion she moved through peripherally, the kind of man whose stillness was different from Kang's stillness the way a locked safe is different from a locked door. Kang's stillness was a choice. Park's was surveillance. He watched her that Thursday with the specific quality of attention she had learned to recognize in her life, the kind that was calculating the value of something relative to its usefulness. She had felt it from certain clients before. She had felt it from the man who got her pregnant when she was 18, in the months before she understood what kind of watching it was. She kept her face neutral and her movements efficient, and she filed it carefully in the part of herself that was always paying attention beneath the music and the humor and the running. When she left that afternoon, Shin appeared at the gate, said nothing, simply walked her to the street. She considered this and what it meant that he did, and decided again to file it and keep moving. She arrived home and called her mother. Talked to Nana for 20 minutes. Her daughter's voice was the clearest sound in her world. 7 years old and already opinionated about everything and absolutely certain of her own worth in a way that Aisha had never managed at 7 or 17 or 26. When are you coming home, Mummy? Nana asked. Soon, baby. You always say soon. Because I always mean it. A pause. Then, with the devastating pragmatism of a 7-year-old, Grandma says soon means when you're ready and you're not ready yet. Aisha was quiet for a moment. Grandma's very smart. I know, Nana said, with enormous satisfaction. She said I get that from her. Aisha laughed and cried at the same time, which she had learned was simply a thing that happened when you loved your child from a distance and were trying to become someone worthy of closing that distance. She hung up and sat in her clean apartment and thought about what ready meant and whether she was. Her father's voice had a lot of opinions about the question. She turned her music up. She moved through her apartment doing small, unnecessary tasks, straightening things that were already straight, wiping surfaces that were already clean, and she thought about a man sitting in a worn chair with a bookmark and a book about a man who stood at the edge of the sea his whole life and never went in. She thought about standing at edges. She thought about what it cost to stay at them. She did not sleep well. The reading room happened on a Thursday evening at the end of the 5th week when the light was doing something golden and specific through the window at the end of the hall, and Aisha had finished everything and was standing in the hallway, putting her caddy in order when he appeared at the top of the stairs. He stopped when he saw her. She stopped what she was doing. You haven't left, he said. I was just going. He was quiet for a moment. Then, with the deliberateness of a man making a decision, I want to show you something. If you have a moment. She should have said she didn't. She had a bus to catch and rice to make and a phone call to return. She had a list of sensible reasons to say no that she had been maintaining since the first day she walked into this mansion. All right, she said. He took her down the hallway past the reading chair alcove. She had been in this part of the house before, but quickly, functionally, and opened a door she had assumed was a storage room. It was not a storage room. It was a library. Floor-to-ceiling shelves on every wall. Books organized with the kind of devotion that spoke of years of careful attention. A second armchair matching the one in the hallway, positioned near a window that had been chosen specifically for its light. A small table with a lamp. A photograph on the shelf nearest the door. Aisha moved into the room slowly. Her hand moved to the spines the way her hand always moved to books. Automatically, reverently. She looked at the photograph last. A woman. Korean, 50-ish in the photograph, with Kang's eyes and a smile that looked like it cost her nothing. Standing in a garden, holding something green and small, looking at whoever held the camera with an expression of complete, uncomplicated warmth. She's beautiful, Aisha said softly. She was, he said. Simply. Finally. The silence between them was different from their other silences. Those had been managed, both of them maintaining comfortable distances within them. This one was honest. It sat in the room between them like a third presence, and neither of them tried to fill it, and it was the most at ease Aisha had felt in a space that wasn't her own in as long as she could remember. She looked at the books, at the worn armchair, at the lamp with its warm circle of light, at the man standing in the room who became, in this space, visibly and completely someone else. Not smaller, exactly, but differently sized. Real in a way that his public self was not. "You come here," she said. "Not a question. When I can. Does anyone else?" "No." She understood. She nodded. She looked at the photograph one more time. "Thank you," she said, "for showing me." He said nothing, but something shifted in his face. Something that had been held back for a very long time, taking a single, careful step toward the door. She went home, sat in her apartment, did not turn the music on, argued with herself for 3 hours about what was happening, and lost the argument comprehensively. Noah Williams arrived on a Wednesday evening in the 6th week with yellow roses and a speech she could tell he had rehearsed. She knew it was rehearsed because she knew Noah, had known him since she was 17, the year before everything, the year she was still the person her father believed she could be, the year she had not yet learned what it felt like to be left. She knew the way his shoulders sat when he was performing sincerity versus the way they sat when he actually felt it, and right now they were slightly too square, slightly too deliberate, the posture of a man who had stood in front of a mirror and told himself to look remorseful. He was still charming. He had always been charming. That had never been the problem. The problem was that charming and trustworthy were not synonyms, and it had taken her until she was 18 and pregnant and watching him not return her calls to understand the difference. "Aisha," he said. His voice was warm, practiced warm. "Noah." Hers was not. "You look," he stopped. Started again. "You look really well." "I know." She did not move from the doorway, did not open the door wider. The yellow roses were approximately 2 feet from her face, and she did not look at them. "What are you doing here?" "I heard you were in Seoul." He shifted his weight. "I've been here a while. Mutual friends mentioned you were here, and I've been thinking, Aisha. A lot. About everything. About what I did." "What did you do, Noah?" She asked this genuinely. Not cruelly. She had moved past cruelty somewhere around year 4. But genuinely. She wanted to know if his version of events had evolved in the 8 years since she had lived through them. His jaw tightened slightly. "I wasn't there for you. When you needed me. I was young and I was scared and I made a choice I've regretted every day since." He looked at her with the specific expression of a man deploying his best available weapon. "I just want the chance to say that to your face. To say I'm sorry. You deserved better." There was a part of Aisha, small, tired, 18 years old and never entirely grown out of it, that had been waiting 8 years for exactly these words. The apology she had replayed the potential of in her worst moments. The words that would explain the inexplicable, that would retroactively fill the silence of unanswered calls and unacknowledged messages, that would tell the story as something survivable rather than something she had simply survived. She did not open the door wider, but she did not close it. "I'll think about it," she said. She watched something in his shoulders relax. Fractionally, carefully. "That's all I'm asking," he said. She closed the door, slid down the inside of it until she was sitting on the floor, which was becoming a habit she was not proud of, and she sat there in the silence of her apartment and waited for her own thoughts to arrive and tell her what any of this meant. Her father's voice came instead. "This is what you do. You leave the door open for things that hurt you because deep down you don't believe you deserve something that doesn't." She sat with this for a long time. Then she got up, made tea, stood at her kitchen window looking at the city and thinking about a poem about a man who stood at the edge of the sea his whole life and never went in. She was not going to think about Kang Jun-ho. She thought about Kang Jun-ho. She arrived at the mansion the next morning carrying all of it. Noah, her father's voice, the yellow roses she had not taken, 8 years of accumulated weight, and she was carrying it well, she thought. Efficiently, the way she carried most things. You packed it down, and you kept moving and nothing showed unless you went still. She was in the kitchen for 40 minutes before he spoke. "Whoever it is," Kang said from the doorway, without looking up from the document he was holding, "they don't deserve the space they're taking up in your head." She went very still. Her hand stopped moving. "You don't know what you're talking about," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "No. Simply. Without defense. But I know that look. I've worn it." She turned around. He was looking at her now, not with the assessment she had first understood from his face, not with the careful management of expression she had learned to read as his public face, but with something direct and specific that she did not know what to do with. "I'm fine," she said. "I know. I'm just. You don't have to explain anything to me." The gentleness of this was somehow worse than if he had pushed. She picked up her caddy. "I'll start upstairs today." "Aisha." She stopped, did not turn around. "The kettle's on," he said. She left without responding. She went upstairs and she cleaned the rooms with the focused fury of someone who is using physical work to manage something that physical work cannot reach. And she did not cry. And when she was finished, she went downstairs and poured herself tea from the kettle and stood at the kitchen window and thought about how she was definitely, absolutely, under no circumstances going to call Noah back. She called Noah back. The following 2 weeks were a pulling back. She arrived. She cleaned. She was professional and efficient and entirely behind glass in a way she had not been since the early weeks when they were still strangers. The warmth that had been quietly assembling itself between them retracted without announcement, and she watched herself do it with the detached clarity of a person who knows they are self-sabotaging and cannot locate the mechanism to stop. He did not comment on it. Did not change. The kettle was still on when she arrived. The tea options were still there. He was present in the mansion on some of her days and absent on others, and on the days he was present, he was simply there, exactly as he had been, reading in the study, working at his desk, moving through the rooms with that particular quality of presence that did not demand anything from her. It was the consistency of him that was doing the damage. She knew how to handle men who got cold when she pulled back. She knew how to handle men who got loud, who demanded, who made her retreat into someone she wasn't. She had developed excellent responses to all of those. She had no response to a man who simply stayed the same. "Why are you being like this?" she said on a Tuesday, walking into the study with more force than she intended, the frustration that had been building for 2 weeks finally arriving at her mouth before she could manage it. He looked up from his desk. "Like what?" he said. "Like, nothing happened. Like everything is exactly the same. Nothing happened. On my end." He put down his pen, looked at her steadily. "I told you I wasn't going anywhere. I meant it." "That's..." She stopped. Started again. "You don't even know what's going on." "No," he agreed. "You haven't told me." The quiet honesty of this landed somewhere she hadn't been expecting. She stood in the doorway of his study with her hands gripping her caddy strap and her walls fully assembled, and she looked at this man who ran an empire and read poetry and had told her, without ceremony or performance, that he was not going anywhere. And she felt something in the carefully maintained architecture of her self-protection develop a crack that she could not locate and therefore could not fix. She left the room. She cleaned something that did not need cleaning. She went home. Park made his move on a Thursday. She was in the east corridor moving between rooms when she became aware of 2 of Park's men materializing into the hallway from adjacent doorways in a way that was technically just 2 men standing in a hallway and was specifically not that at all. Park was at the end of the corridor, watching. Nothing happened. Nothing was said. It was the specific variety of threat that operates through presence alone. The message delivered entirely through arrangement, through the particular quality of attention being directed at a person, through the silent communication of "we know you're here, and we know what you are to him, and you should think carefully about that." Aisha kept her face completely neutral, kept moving, reached the end of the corridor, and went down the stairs without quickening her step. She was halfway through the kitchen before her hands started shaking slightly, and she ran cold water over them and stood at the sink until they stopped, because she was Aisha Mensa, and she did not show that kind of thing in rooms she wasn't certain were empty. She did not tell Kang. Kang found out within 2 hours through mechanisms she was not aware of and would never fully understand. She was in the library, dusting the shelves with the particular care she gave that room, the care that had become its own private ritual, when she became aware of a quality of stillness elsewhere in the mansion that was different from the ordinary stillness. Colder, more specific. She did not go to investigate. She had enough instinct to understand that whatever was happening was not for her presence. Later, descending the stairs with her caddy, she passed the corridor where Park had been. It was empty. Something about the atmosphere of the space had changed, rearranged itself around an absence that had the particular quality of a decision made. Shin appeared at the bottom of the stairs. "I'll walk you to the gate," he said. She looked at him. "Shin." "Ms. Aisha. Did something happen?" "The gate is this way," he said pleasantly. She went with him. At the gate, she turned and looked back at the mansion and thought about what it meant to be in a world like this one. What it meant that she had walked into it accidentally and kept walking back in, and what it meant that she still, knowing what she knew, kept coming back. She thought about safety and what it was made of. She had thought it was made of smallness. Small apartment, small life, controlled spaces, no one close enough to do damage. She had built herself a very safe small world, and she had been sitting in it for 8 years, and Nana was in Accra, and her father's voice was still the loudest thing in any room. Maybe safety wasn't made of smallness. Maybe she had been thinking about this wrong. Noah revealed what he actually wanted on a Sunday over coffee in a neutral cafe in Itaewon. He had been building to it. She could see that now in retrospect. The way the conversations had been gradually angling, the questions about her week that were more specifically interested in certain parts of her week than others, the way his attention sharpened almost imperceptibly when she mentioned the mansion, the client, the work. He was good at it. She had to grant him that. He had the patience of a man who had spent years learning how to wait people out. But she had spent 8 years learning how to notice. And she noticed. The thing is, Noah said, leaning forward over his coffee cup with an expression of careful vulnerability, I have some complicated situations at the moment. Financially. He paused. Let that sit. And I've heard, and I know this might sound like I'm asking a lot, that you might have some connection to people who could potentially. Stop, Aisha said. He stopped. She looked at him. She looked at him completely. The rehearsed shoulders, the deployed warmth, the yellow roses that had been a prop in a performance she had almost, out of the specific exhaustion of old longing, agreed to watch. The 18-year-old inside her who had spent 8 years waiting for him to come back and say sorry finally, in this moment, in this cafe, understood that the apology had also been a prop. There was a silence. Then it wasn't sad. It was clear. The specific clarity that arrives when the last small hope you were protecting without knowing it finally, quietly goes out, and you realize you are not devastated. You are free. She stood up, put money on the table for her coffee, put on her jacket. Aisha. Noah. She looked at him one last time. Not with anger. Not with grief. With the settled finality of a woman who has just put something down that she has been carrying for 8 years and realizes her hands are empty and her back doesn't hurt anymore. Don't contact me again. He started to speak. I said what I said. She walked out of the cafe into the Sunday afternoon, and she did not look back, and the 18-year-old inside her walked out with her, and the door closed behind them both. She called her mother from the street, asked to speak to Nana, talked to her daughter for 40 minutes, about school, about the drawing with the mop and the crown, about what Nana wanted to be when she grew up, which was currently either a doctor or a dinosaur, depending on the day. Aisha laughed until her face hurt. She stood on a Seoul street in the Sunday afternoon light and laughed with her daughter, and she was just a mother, entirely present, and something that had been constricted for 8 years began, incrementally, to open. I love you, baby, she said. I love you too, Mummy, Nana said. When are you coming home? Aisha looked up at the sky, thought about a reading room with a photograph of a woman in a garden, thought about tea options on a counter, thought about a man who said I'm not going anywhere like it was the simplest fact in the world. Soon, she said, and this time she meant something different by it. The glass broke on a Monday morning. She was reaching into the cabinet, the one she had reorganized in week 1, the one with the spices now correctly placed and the cups arranged in the order she had established, and everything exactly where it should be. And her hand caught the edge of a glass, and it slipped, and it hit the kitchen floor and broke into 5 pieces in the morning quiet. She stood there looking at the broken glass, and something that had been held together through 8 years of relentless forward motion, through music turned up loud and work done with focused fury and small apartments kept immaculate and phone calls to Accra that she ended before they got too long, through 1,000 mornings of getting up and keeping moving, came apart. She did not decide to slide down the cabinet. She just found herself there, on the kitchen floor, surrounded by 5 pieces of glass and all the things she had refused to go still enough to feel. And she was crying in the way she had not cried since she was 18 years old. Not quietly, not neatly, not in the managed private way she had perfected, but completely. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere below decision, below management, below even language. She heard him come in. She did not look up. He stood in the kitchen doorway. She was aware of him standing there in the way you are aware of a solid, immovable thing entering your field of consciousness. And then he crossed the kitchen and he sat down on the floor beside her. He did not say anything. He did not hand her something or stand over her or make the sounds that people make when they are uncomfortable with another person's falling apart and trying to abbreviate it. He just sat down on the kitchen floor in his expensive trousers, and he was simply there, solid, present, like he had been planning to sit on this floor at this particular moment and was exactly where he intended to be. The quality of being witnessed without being managed broke something open in her further. I don't know how to not be broken, she said. Her voice was wrecked. She did not look at him. He was quiet for a moment. Then, without looking at her either, looking straight ahead at the kitchen cabinet. Neither do I. I stopped pretending the broken parts weren't there. It's different from fixing them. But it's something. She was quiet. The crying was slowing. Outside, Seoul was going about its Monday. I have a daughter, she said. She had not said this in this room before. She had not said it plainly, without preamble, without apology, to anyone who did not already know. It left her mouth and sat between them in the kitchen, and she waited for it to change the quality of his presence beside her. It did not change. Tell me about her, he said. So she did. She told him about Nana, about the drawing with the mop and the crown, about the opinions at 7, about the laugh that Aisha's mother said was identical to Aisha's laugh at 7, about the gap between her front teeth, about the way she said her grandmother's name with 3 extra syllables because she had decided it sounded better that way. She told him in the way you tell someone about a person you love when you have been lonely with the love of them for too long. He listened the way he always listened, completely, without performing it. She's in Accra, Aisha said. With my mother. Because she stopped. Her jaw tightened. Because I left. To build something better. That's what I told myself. But sometimes I think. You were protecting her, he said. From what? From me. From a version of yourself you were afraid would hurt her. He paused. There's a difference between running away from something and running towards something better for it. You know which one you're doing. She looked at him for the first time since he had sat down. His face was open in a way she had never seen it outside the reading room. The boss was not present. The performance was not present. There was just this man, on a kitchen floor, looking at her. My father told me I couldn't amount to anything, she said. When I found out I was pregnant. He said it like it was something he'd always expected to say. Like I'd just confirmed something. Her voice was steady now. The words had been said so many times inside her head that saying them aloud felt almost like letting down a weight. I was 18. I was terrified. And he went quiet in that specific way that meant he was done with me. Not angry. Done. Kang said nothing. Let it land. Let it mean what it meant. I've been hearing his voice ever since, she said. Every time something good starts happening. Every time I think maybe I've actually built something worth having. He shows up. I always knew. I always knew you wouldn't hold yourself together. She laughed. A short, painful sound. 8 years. And it's still his voice that's loudest. Your father was wrong, Kang said. Simply. Directly. Not as comfort. Not as reassurance. Not as the obligatory kindness of someone trying to make her feel better. As fact. She looked at him. A man who tells his daughter she's worth nothing for surviving something hard, he said, is not protecting standards. He's protecting his own fragile certainty. He needed you to fail to explain something about himself. That has never been about you. You've been paying for his debt for 8 years. The silence that followed was the loudest thing she had ever been inside. He looked at the cabinet across from them. My father told me softness was death, he said. That care made you vulnerable, and vulnerability got you killed. He taught me to cut off anything that made me feel too much. And then he left me a world built on that principle and called it a legacy. He was quiet for a moment. My mother used to garden. She said growing things required you to believe in things you couldn't see yet. She died when I was 22 and I buried what she taught me with her because I couldn't afford to keep it. He paused. I've been in this house for 11 years. I have a library no one knows about. I water the plants on the 3rd floor terrace at 6 in the morning before anyone is awake. I read poetry on Thursday afternoons. He looked at her. I've been living 2 lives so long I forgot they were supposed to be one. She looked at this man who watered plants at 6 in the morning and read poetry in secret, and had kept a worn bookmark straightened in a chair that no one else was permitted to touch. Jun-ho, she said, and it was the first time she had used his name and they both heard it. Yes. I'm sorry about your mother. I'm sorry about your father, he said. About what he stole from you. They sat on the kitchen floor for a while longer. The morning light shifted. At some point he got up and swept the broken glass into the bin without comment. And she stood up and washed her face at the sink. And when she turned around, he had made 2 cups of tea and placed one on the counter in front of her. She picked it up, held it in both hands. Thank you, she said. Not for the tea. He understood this. Any time, he said, and meant the same thing back. What followed was not the dramatic transformation that stories sometimes promise. The immediate unfurling of 2 people into their best selves, the seamless assembly of a new life from the pieces of old ones. It was quieter and more real than that. It was Tuesday mornings with badly made eggs. It was books passed between them with sticky note opinions inside. It was 2 people learning, incrementally and with occasional difficulty, how to be known. She taught him to cook. This was an exercise in patience that she had not anticipated needing to this degree. He approached the kitchen with the confidence of a man accustomed to competence in every domain, and the kitchen received this confidence with consistent indifference. He burned the first 3 things she taught him, overcompensated on the 4th, produced something on the 5th attempt that was technically edible but would not have been described as such by anyone eating it without a prior emotional investment in the chef. You're overcomplicating it, she told him, the second week of lessons, standing beside him at the stove. I'm following the instructions precisely. You're following the instructions like they're a legal document. Instructions are instructions. Cooking instructions have spirit, she said. You can't enforce spirit, you have to feel it. He looked at her. You're telling me to feel the stew. I'm telling you to stop treating the stew like a negotiation and start treating it like, she searched for the right comparison. Like a poem. Something shifted in his face. Like a poem, he repeated. Yes. He turned back to the stove. She watched him make a visible internal adjustment, something releasing in his shoulders, some habitual management dropping away. He added the next ingredient differently. Less precise. More present. The stew, an hour later, was the best thing he had made. He said nothing about this when they ate. But she caught the expression he was suppressing and she filed it under things I will absolutely use against him later with significant satisfaction. He gave her books from the reading room. Not recommendations. He would simply appear in whatever room she was working in with a book under his arm and set it on the nearest surface and leave without comment. She understood this as the most efficient possible expression of I thought of you when I read this from a man who had not previously had anyone to think of in that way. She read them all. Left her sticky note opinions. This chapter made me angry in a way I think was intentional, well done to everyone involved, and returned them to the reading room shelf with the notes still inside, because she understood that he went back and read the notes, because she had caught him doing it once, and he had not been embarrassed about being caught, and she had found this disproportionately affecting. She told him about Nana in increments. Small things first. The gap in her front teeth. The dinosaur face. The way she had decided that her grandmother's name had insufficient syllables and had added 3 more without consultation. Then bigger things, the specific weight of loving a child from a distance, the particular guilt of a mother who is both building toward her child and running from her own inadequacy simultaneously, the way Nana's voice on the phone could crack Aisha open and put her back together in the space of 40 minutes. He listened to all of it with the complete attention that was simply who he was, not performed, not strategic, just present. He asked questions that told her he had retained everything she'd said. The drawing with the crown. How old was she when she made that? And she understood, in the accumulation of these moments, what it meant to be genuinely known rather than merely observed. I'd like to meet her, he said one evening. If that's ever something you'd want. She looked at him over the top of her teacup. He was sitting in what had become his chair at the kitchen counter. There had been no formal designation of this. It had simply happened through the natural logic of repetition, and he was watching her with the patience of a man who had made his position known and was content to wait for whatever the answer was. Maybe, she said. He nodded, went back to his book. She turned to hide the expression on her face, because in her vocabulary maybe meant yes, and he did not yet know this, and she was not quite ready to tell him. Park was removed from his position on a Friday. Aisha was not present for it. She learned of it only in the specific way she had learned to learn things about the world she had walked into, through atmosphere, through the rearrangement of absences, through the way Shin carried himself differently, the following Monday with the particular stillness of someone from whose shoulders a specific weight has been lifted. What she did know, because Shin told her with the precise economy of a man who volunteered exactly as much information as was necessary and not one syllable more, was that the position had been removed for conduct inconsistent with the standards of the organization. This was the entirety of the explanation she received. It was sufficient. She was in the reading room when Kang came to find her that evening. He stood in the doorway. She was sitting in the second armchair. She had been sitting in it for 3 weeks now, having been wordlessly invited to do so when he had arrived one Thursday to find her reading in it, and had simply sat in his own chair and opened his own book without comment. It had become their room in the way that certain spaces become claimed by the people who bring the right kind of presence to them. "Park won't be a problem," he said. She looked up from her book. "I know." A pause. "You're not going to ask me what happened?" "No." He considered this. "Most people would want to know." "I know what kind of world this is," she said. "I walked into it with my eyes open. I chose to keep coming back." She looked at him steadily. "I don't need the details. I need to know that you handle what needs handling. That's enough for me." He was quiet for a moment. "You're not afraid of it," he said. "My world." "I'm not naive about it," she said. "That's different from afraid." He crossed the room and sat in his chair. He opened his book. She opened hers. The lamp made its warm circle of light across both of them, and outside Seoul went about its Friday evening, and inside this room, 2 people sat in the particular peace of those who have agreed to be real with each other and have found, against the odds of their separate histories, that the real is something they can both live in. She visited her father on a Saturday morning 3 weeks later. She had not told anyone she was going. Not her mother, who would have offered to come, who would have meant well, whose presence would have changed the shape of what needed to happen. Not Jun-ho, who would have said nothing and understood everything, and whose steady presence she was learning to depend on in ways she was still calibrating. She went alone, because it needed to be alone. Her father opened the door, and he looked older than the last time she had seen him in person, which was 2 years ago at a family gathering where they had been carefully, expertly polite to each other in the way of people who have agreed without discussion to keep a wound covered. He looked tired in a way that aging and tiredness alone did not fully explain. He looked like a man who had spent a long time being certain of things and was perhaps, at this late stage, becoming uncertain and didn't know what to do with that. "Aisha," he said. "Papa," she said. He let her in. They sat in the living room where she had grown up, and they drank tea that he made without asking how she took it, which was how he had always made it, which was no longer how she took it, and she drank it without correcting this because the tea was not what she had come about. "I'm not here to fight," she said. "I want you to know that before I say anything else." He looked at his cup. "I've spent 8 years carrying what you said to me," she said. "The specific thing you said once. I think you've probably forgotten you said it. But I heard it every day. Every time I thought about building something, being something, asking for something good. Your voice arrived first." She paused. "I'm not asking you to apologize. I'm not sure you're able to, and I've decided I don't need it." She looked at him. "I'm telling you that I'm done. Not done with you. Done with giving your words more authority over my life than my own." Her father was quiet for a long time. He looked like a man inside a difficult calculation. She had expected defensiveness, perhaps dismissal. What she had not fully prepared for was the thing that moved across his face instead, something older and more complicated, something that looked, if she was reading it correctly, like a man confronting the ledger of his choices and finding the balance unwelcome. "You were so bright," he said finally. His voice was different from the voice in her head. Smaller, older, more tired. I was afraid for you. And I had no language for being afraid, so it came out as," he stopped. "As certainty," she said. "Yes." She looked at her father. She saw, perhaps for the first time, that his wounds had their own origin, that the coldness had been taught to him as survival, the same way it had been taught to a young man in Seoul who had buried his mother's garden at 22 and called it necessity. She saw that his failure had never been about her capacity. It had been about his own language for fear. This did not erase 8 years. It did not make the sentences easy, but it made him smaller than the voice in her head had ever allowed him to be, and that smallness was, strangely, a mercy. She had been living under the authority of a myth. The man in front of her was just a man. "I'm going to be okay, Papa," she said. "I want you to know that. I'm building something. I have a daughter who puts crowns in her drawings of me. She paused. I'm going to be okay whether you believe that or not. But I wanted to say it to your face. She finished her tea. She stood up. She hugged him. Briefly, with the care you give to something fragile you are choosing to be gentle with, and she left. She walked out of her father's house, and the voice was still there. But it was quieter. It was the right size now, the size of a tired man sitting in his living room with the wrong tea. Not the size of a verdict. Not the size of a wall. She took out her phone. Called Jun-ho. How did it go, he said. He had known, somehow, without being told. She had stopped being surprised by this. I think I put him down, she said. The version of him in my head. I think he's finally the right size. A pause. Then, quietly. Good. Jun-ho. Yes. I'm coming over. I know, he said. The kettle's on. Nana arrived on a Sunday. Aisha had prepared for this with the specific intensity she applied to things that mattered enormously, which meant she had cleaned the mansion twice in the preceding week despite it requiring neither visit, had reorganized the kitchen one final time, had identified the room on the second floor with the best light and the most interesting ceiling, and casually mentioned to Jun-ho that a child might find it engaging, and had then spent 3 days telling herself she was not nervous about a 7-year-old meeting a mob boss who read poetry on Thursday afternoons. She was nervous. Jun-ho, for his part, had restocked every cabinet in the kitchen. Shin had overseen this operation with the focused attention usually reserved for territorial logistics. There were now 6 varieties of juice, 4 types of crackers, 2 kinds of fruit arranged in a bowl that Aisha recognized had been chosen for its visual appeal, and an assortment of small snacks that suggested someone had asked a 7-year-old's opinion by proxy and taken it seriously. Aisha had stood in the kitchen looking at this and felt something move through her chest that she did not have immediate language for. Something warm and specific and terrifying in the way of things that are exactly what you wanted and therefore have the power to matter. Her mother brought Nana to the gate on a video call, a practical arrangement given the geography, and Aisha met her daughter in the entrance hall of a mansion that smelled like lavender because she had cleaned it that way from the first day, and Nana walked in and stopped and looked around with the comprehensive assessment of a child who takes all spaces seriously. Mummy, she said, without yet moving. This is a very big house. I know, baby. Does a giant live here? Not exactly. Nana considered this. Then she walked fully into the hall and opened her arms, and Aisha went down to her knees and held her daughter with the particular completeness of a mother who has been holding distance where she should have been holding her child, and the distance closed in that hallway, and she pressed her face into Nana's hair and stayed there for a long moment with her eyes closed and her father's voice entirely, blessedly absent. Jun-ho appeared in the doorway to the kitchen. Nana saw him first. She pulled back from Aisha and looked at him with the direct, comprehensive evaluation of someone who has not yet learned that staring is considered impolite and has also not decided to care. Are you the giant? She said. No, he said. You're very tall. Yes. My mummy is not very tall. I've noticed, he said, with complete seriousness. Nana appeared to find this an acceptable response. She walked toward the kitchen past him, and he stepped to the side to let her pass with the instinctive courtesy of someone who recognizes authority when it enters a room regardless of its height. She stopped in the kitchen doorway and surveyed the contents of the counter. You have a lot of juice, she said. Do you see one you like? The mango one. She looked at him. Do you have cups with handles? I like cups with handles. Shin materialized from somewhere in the kitchen, produced a cup with a handle, poured mango juice into it with the focused attention of a man executing a significant task, and set it on the counter at an accessible height. Nana looked at the cup, looked at Shin. Thank you, she said, with the genuine gravity of a person who means their manners. Shin straightened. You're welcome, Miss Nana. Aisha, watching this from the doorway, was making a face that she would later describe to her mother as completely embarrassing, and which Jun-ho would later describe to no one because he was keeping it in the part of himself where he kept the things that mattered. The afternoon proceeded with the particular joy of things that work without anyone forcing them. Nana was given a tour of the house by her own insistence. She had decided the mansion required understanding, and she applied herself to this comprehensively. She had opinions about each room. The library made her stop in the doorway and go uncharacteristically quiet. These are all books, she said. All of them, Jun-ho said. She walked into the room with the reverence of someone entering a space that has earned it. She went directly to the lowest shelf and crouched down to read the spines. I can read some of them, she said. The ones that are not Korean. Which ones can you read? She pulled out a slim collection. Looked at the cover. Looked at him. Is this poetry? Yes. My grandma reads me poetry sometimes. She opened it carefully. She says poems are for feelings that are too big for regular sentences. Jun-ho was quiet for a moment. Your grandmother is very wise. I know. Nana said this with complete satisfaction. She says I'm like her. She considered the poem she had opened to. I'll read this one at home. If that's okay. You can borrow it, he said. Bring it back when you're done. She looked at him with the specific calculation of a child determining whether an adult can be trusted with a commitment. Apparently, he passed the assessment, because she tucked the book under her arm and moved on to the next shelf. Aisha was standing in the doorway watching this. Jun-ho crossed the room to stand beside her. They stood together watching Nana move through the library with her mango juice in one hand and the borrowed poetry book under her arm, and the afternoon light came through the window at the angle that had always made this room feel like a painting, and Aisha felt something she had been guarding for 8 years open completely and quietly and without pain. The way a door opens when the person on the other side has been patient long enough. She took his hand. He did not look at her, just laced his fingers through hers like it was something they had been doing for years. Maybe, in the way of things that are inevitable, they had been. The last evening of Nana's visit, Aisha called her mother from the kitchen while Jun-ho attempted dinner with the supervision she had recently been able to reduce from constant to periodic. She was on her second cup of tea. Nana was on the terrace with Shin, who had been given the task of showing her the plants and had undertaken this with the seriousness he gave to all tasks, which meant he was currently crouched beside a planter explaining the watering schedule to a 7-year-old who was taking notes in the small notebook she carried everywhere. She's wonderful, her mother said. She had heard the afternoon through video calls and second-hand reports and the particular quality of Aisha's voice, which her mother could read with the fluency of a language learned before words. She's extraordinary, Aisha said. She always has been. You sound different, her mother said. I feel different. Good different. Aisha looked at Jun-ho, who had just done something inadvisable to the onions and was examining the results with an expression of unfounded confidence. Mummy, she said, I think I'm home. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Then, I know, baby. I've been watching you find it. She hung up and walked to the stove and took the pan from Jun-ho without ceremony. He wrapped his arms around her from behind while she fixed what he had ruined, the way he had started doing, without announcement, without asking, just naturally, like two people who have finally stopped managing the distance between them and discovered that without the management, they fit. It's not that bad, he said, about the onions. It's carbon, she said. Caramelized. Jun-ho. Caramelized aggressively. She laughed. He pressed his mouth to the side of her head in the brief, specific way that was becoming a language between them. Not a kiss, exactly. Something quieter. A reminder of presence. She kept cooking. The origami crane sat on the kitchen windowsill in the late light. She had put it there weeks ago without thinking about it, moved it from the counter to the window during a cleaning session, set it where the light was good, and it had stayed. Made from a ransom note. Sitting in a kitchen window in the light. Something made from an instrument of harm that had been folded into something delicate and kept. Nana came in from the terrace with dirt on her knees and the earnest expression of someone who has just been given important information. The yellow plant needs more water than the others, she informed the room. Shin says it's particular. Most things worth keeping are, Jun-ho said. Nana considered this. That's a poem sentence, she said. Maybe. She went to wash her hands with the efficiency of a child who has decided dinner is imminent. Aisha felt Jun-ho's arms around her and looked at the crane in the window and thought about all the things that had led here. A wrong address, a ransom note, a handwritten note about vacuuming, a man who sat on a kitchen floor, and she thought that if she had known, at 18, that this specific ordinary extraordinary evening was waiting somewhere in her future, she might have been gentler with herself in all the years between. She was going to be gentler with herself from now on. She had decided this on the floor of this kitchen, amid broken glass and 8 years of held weight, and she was choosing it again now, in the light, with dinner on the stove and her daughter's voice from the bathroom, and a man who had meant it when he said he wasn't going anywhere. She put the food on the table. Nana came back and climbed onto her chair with the naturalness of someone for whom this kitchen has already become a known place. Jun-ho sat across from her. Shin appeared in the doorway, was invited to stay by a 7-year-old who had apparently decided his opinion on the plants qualified him for dinner, and sat at the end of the table with the expression of a man experiencing something he doesn't have a category for. They ate dinner. Nana told a story about her school with many tangents and no clear resolution that everyone listened to seriously. Jun-ho asked 3 follow-up questions. Shin refilled the mango juice. Aisha looked around the table and understood that this improbable, unplanned, wrong address assemblage of people was a family in the only way that mattered, through the choice to show up and stay. She came to clean his house. She had no idea she was also, finally, cleaning out the parts of herself she had been told to be ashamed of. He, the man everyone feared and no one truly saw, turned out to be the one person who looked at every broken, complicated, beautiful piece of her and refused to agree that any of it made her less. She spent 8 years believing she was the mess. Turns out she was always the home. The lessons this story carries are simple and necessary. That the loudest voice in your life does not have to be the truest one. That what a parent says in a moment of their own fear and inadequacy is not a verdict on your worth. It is information about their wound, not yours. That you can love someone who hurt you and still refuse to carry their damage as your own. That softness is not weakness. That the bravest thing you will ever do is let someone see you clearly after you have spent years making sure no one could. That consistency, quiet, undramatic, daily consistency, is the most radical act of love available to us. That running towards something better is different from running away, and you are the only one who knows which one you are doing. And the moment you are honest about that is the moment the running can stop. That your past is not your identity. That a mistake made at 18 or 28 or 38 is not a sentence. That the people who love you properly will look at the whole of you and not select the worst chapter as the definitive one. That home is not a place. It is what happens when you finally stop performing yourself and someone is there for the real version and stays anyway. And that sometimes the most important door you will ever walk through is the one you walked through by accident, looking for somewhere else entirely, and found exactly where you were supposed to be. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. It means more than you know that you gave your time and your heart to Aisha and Jun-ho and small, extraordinary Nana. If any part of this story reminded you of your own worth, of the voice that needs to get quieter, of the door you have been standing at the edge of the person you have been being patient toward, including yourself, then it did what it was supposed to do. Share it with someone who needs to hear that they are not the mess. They are the home. Thank you, truly, for being here.